Today, former President Trump's White House Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows, he declined to appear for testimony that he had been subpoenaed to give this morning. The investigation says that Mark Meadows is therefore likely to be found in contempt. He's potentially going to be criminally prosecuted for contempt. But Mr. Meadows ended the day today by suing the committee that's conducting the investigation in what appears to be an effort to drag this thing out, to slow it down. And on top of that, in another surprise today, we also learned that before Mr. Meadows decided to bail on his subpoenas and sue the investigation, he did hand over some materials to the committee that they find useful for their investigation. In a letter to Mark Meadows' attorney from the chair of the investigation, Congressman Benny Thompson, today, Thompson writes this:
"The bombshell we've all been waiting for just dropped. And folks, it's even worse than we imagined. Mark Meadows, Trump's own chief of staff, secretly recorded the president committing crimes and has now turned those recordings over to federal prosecutors. We're not talking about hearsay or speculation anymore. We're talking about actual audio recordings of Donald Trump ordering his staff to overturn the 2020 election. And the man who was supposed to be his most loyal soldier is the one who captured it all on tape. This is the smoking gun that changes everything, and the details are absolutely jaw-dropping. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest, you can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us. Be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
So, an email dated January 5th, 2021, the day before the attack on the Capitol, regarding a 38-page PowerPoint briefing titled Election Fraud, Foreign Interference, and Options for the 6th of January that was to be provided, quote, on the Hill. Also, among others, a email dated January 5th about having the National Guard on standby.
Picture this scene for a moment. While Trump was publicly claiming the election was stolen behind closed doors, his own chief of staff was secretly documenting everything because he absolutely knew that what they were doing was criminal. Mark Meadows wasn't just taking notes during these meetings. He was recording Trump's voice, capturing his exact words as he ordered illegal schemes to steal an election he knew he'd lost. And now, all of that evidence is in the hands of federal prosecutors who are building what might be the most devastating criminal case against a former president in American history. Here's what makes this absolutely explosive. According to newly unsealed court filings from October 2024, Meadows didn't just flip on Trump. He provided what prosecutors are calling a treasure trove of evidence. We're talking phone recordings, contemporaneous notes, detailed testimony about private meetings where Trump allegedly directed plots to overturn democracy itself. The recordings reportedly captured Trump saying, and I quote, "We have to do whatever it takes. Just get it done for Georgia." Those aren't the words of someone who thinks they won legitimately. Those are the words of someone desperately trying to steal power, and his own chief of staff recorded him saying it. But wait, it gets even more damning. In his testimony to federal investigators, Meadows revealed something that completely destroys Trump's defense. He told them that Trump privately called Sidney Powell's fraud claims crazy, the same claims Trump was using publicly to justify his pressure campaign across multiple states. Think about what that means. Trump knew the fraud allegations were nonsense. He literally called them crazy behind closed doors, but he used them anyway to try to overthrow the government. That's not just lying to the public. That's knowingly using false pretenses to commit crimes against democracy. The FBI interview notes are perhaps the most revealing part of all this. Meadows was reportedly terrified the plot would be discovered. He described Trump's blunt language and what he called horrific orders that would destroy the party if they ever came out. Now stop and think about that for a second. The president's own chief of staff thought Trump's orders were so horrific that they would destroy the entire Republican Party if people found out about them. And he was so scared of what was happening that he started secretly recording everything to protect himself. What we're seeing here is the ultimate betrayal from Trump's perspective, but from the perspective of justice and democracy, it's the ultimate vindication. The man who was in the room, who heard every conversation, who saw every scheme unfold, has provided prosecutors with exactly what they need to prove Trump's guilt beyond any reasonable doubt. These aren't anonymous sources or distant observers. This is the president's right-hand man, armed with recordings and documents that capture the conspiracy in real time. Now let's dig into the specifics of what Meadows revealed, because the details are absolutely staggering. According to the court filings unsealed in October 2024, Meadows handed over phone recordings that captured Trump giving direct orders to overturn the election results. We're not talking about vague suggestions or political rhetoric. We're talking about specific, actionable commands to commit crimes. Trump allegedly instructed his staff to find votes that didn't exist, to pressure governors to change results, and to approve fake slates of electors. Each one of these actions is a federal crime, and Meadows has it all on tape. The timeline here is crucial to understand. While Trump was standing in front of cameras claiming he'd won in a landslide, Meadows was in the background, documenting what he apparently recognized as criminal behavior. The recordings span multiple states and multiple schemes. In Georgia, Trump's recorded saying they need to get it done by any means necessary. For Michigan, there are discussions about pressuring local officials. For Pennsylvania, schemes to invalidate legally cast ballots. This wasn't one bad decision or a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a systematic, multi-state conspiracy to steal an election, and the president's chief of staff was recording it all. What makes Meadows' testimony particularly devastating is that he provides context that only an insider could know. He describes private meetings where Trump would acknowledge that they'd lost certain states fair and square, only to turn around minutes later and demand that his team find a way to flip those states anyway. He details how Trump would receive briefings showing there was no fraud, then immediately go on television and claim massive fraud. Meadows knew what Trump knew, when he knew it, and most importantly, he knew that Trump was lying to everyone, including his own supporters. The recordings also apparently capture something that prosecutors say is crucial: Trump's state of mind. In criminal law, proving intent is everything. You need to show that someone didn't just do something wrong, but that they knew it was wrong and did it anyway. Well, according to Meadows, Trump made it abundantly clear that he understood what he was asking for was illegal. There are reportedly conversations where Trump acknowledges the legal risks, but demands they proceed anyway. There are moments where he discusses how to avoid getting caught rather than whether what they're doing is right. This isn't the behavior of someone who genuinely believes they won. This is the behavior of someone committing crimes and trying to cover their tracks. Let's talk about the horrific orders that Meadows referenced in his FBI interviews. While we don't have all the details yet, sources familiar with the testimony suggest these orders went far beyond what we've previously known. We're potentially talking about discussions of using military force to seize voting machines, plans to declare martial law in swing states, and schemes to arrest election officials who wouldn't cooperate. Meadows was apparently so disturbed by some of these proposals that he started documenting everything as insurance, knowing that if these plans were ever executed, everyone involved would likely end up in federal prison. The fact that Meadows described being terrified tells you everything about the atmosphere in Trump's inner circle during this period. This wasn't normal political hardball or aggressive campaigning. This was a criminal conspiracy that everyone involved knew could land them behind bars. Meadows, a former congressman who understood the law, recognized that what Trump was demanding wasn't just unethical or inappropriate, it was explicitly criminal. And rather than go down with the ship, he started building a life raft of evidence that he could use to save himself when everything inevitably came crashing down. Prosecutors are calling Meadows a crucial insider witness, and it's easy to see why. Unlike other witnesses who might have seen pieces of the conspiracy, Meadows saw the whole thing. He was in every meeting, on every call, part of every discussion. He knows where all the bodies are buried because he helped bury them. And now he's providing prosecutors with a roadmap to every crime Trump committed in his desperate attempt to cling to power. This isn't just testimony. It's a guided tour through a criminal conspiracy led by the one person who was there for all of it. The recordings are particularly important because they eliminate Trump's ability to claim this is all hearsay or misremembering. You can't argue with your own voice on tape. You can't claim you were misquoted when we can hear exactly what you said. Trump has always been masterful at creating alternative narratives and muddying the waters, but recordings don't lie. When a jury hears Trump's voice ordering illegal acts, when they hear him acknowledging that he knows it's wrong but demanding it anyway, there's no spin that can explain that away. What's also significant is that Meadows apparently kept contemporaneous notes in addition to the recordings. These notes provide additional context and documentation of meetings that might not have been recorded. They show patterns of behavior, repeated attempts to execute illegal schemes, and the evolution of the conspiracy over time. For prosecutors, this is like having a daily journal of criminal activity written by someone who was in the room when it all happened. It's the kind of evidence that defense attorneys have nightmares about. So, where does this leave us in terms of accountability and justice? We now have definitive proof, provided by Trump's own chief of staff, that the former president engaged in a criminal conspiracy to overturn a legitimate election. We have recordings, we have documents, we have testimony from the ultimate insider. The question isn't whether Trump committed crimes anymore. Meadows' evidence removes any doubt about that. The question is whether our system of justice is strong enough to hold a former president accountable, especially one who might be president again. The legal implications of Meadows' cooperation are staggering. Prosecutors now have what they need to prove not just that crimes were committed, but that Trump personally directed them. The recordings make it impossible for Trump to claim he was just receiving bad advice or that rogue actors were operating without his knowledge. When the jury hears Trump's voice ordering specific illegal acts, when they hear him acknowledging the illegality but proceeding anyway, conviction becomes not just likely but almost inevitable. Unless, of course, Trump can successfully claim presidential immunity, which is why that legal battle has become so crucial. But let's think about what this means beyond just the legal case. Mark Meadows was one of Trump's most trusted advisors, someone who stood by him through countless controversies, someone who was considered absolutely loyal. And even he felt compelled to secretly record Trump because he was so horrified by what was happening. If Trump's own chief of staff thought his actions were criminal enough to require secret documentation, what does that tell us about the severity of what Trump was trying to do? This wasn't politics as usual, and this was an attempted coup, and everyone close to Trump knew it. The betrayal aspect of this story is fascinating from a psychological perspective. Trump demands absolute loyalty from everyone around him, but he inspires no loyalty in return. Time and again, we've seen his closest allies flip on him when faced with legal jeopardy. Michael Cohen, his personal lawyer, testified against him. Now Mark Meadows, his chief of staff, has provided recordings of his crimes. These aren't Democrats or never Trumpers. These are people who were in Trump's inner circle, who benefited from their association with him, but who ultimately chose self-preservation over loyalty to a man who would throw them under the bus in a heartbeat. The public impact of these revelations cannot be understated. For Trump's supporters who genuinely believed the election was stolen, learning that Trump himself called the fraud claims crazy in private while pushing them in public should be a wake-up call. They were lied to, manipulated, and used by someone who knew the truth, but chose to deceive them anyway. Some went to prison for January 6th believing they were patriots fighting for democracy, when in reality they were pawns in Trump's criminal scheme to steal power. Meadows' recordings prove that Trump knew exactly what he was doing and that he deliberately misled millions of Americans. For the Republican Party, this creates an existential crisis. Meadows warned that Trump's horrific orders would destroy the party if they came out, and now they're out. How does the GOP move forward when their standard bearer has been exposed as someone who tried to overthrow democracy itself? How do Republican officials who supported Trump's claims explain their actions now that we know Trump himself thought those claims were crazy? The party has tied itself so tightly to Trump that his crimes become their burden, and Meadows' evidence makes it impossible to pretend they didn't know or couldn't have known what was really happening. The recordings also raise serious questions about everyone else who was in those rooms. Who else knew what Trump was doing was criminal? Who else stayed silent while democracy was under attack? Who else chose party loyalty over their oath to the Constitution? Meadows might be cooperating now, but he was complicit then. He recorded these crimes, but he also enabled them. The same could be said for countless other Trump administration officials who knew what was happening was wrong but went along with it anyway. They're all implicated by Meadows' evidence, and they all need to answer for their roles in this conspiracy. Looking forward, these revelations change everything about how we understand Trump's potential return to power. We're not talking about policy differences or political disagreements anymore. We're talking about someone who has been caught on tape trying to overthrow democracy returning to the White House. The recordings Meadows provided aren't old news or ancient history. They're evidence of crimes that Trump committed the last time he held power. If he's willing to commit those crimes as president, what would he do with another 4 years and the knowledge that the system didn't hold him accountable the first time? The international implications are equally serious. How can America claim to be a beacon of democracy when we might re-elect someone who tried to overthrow democracy? How can we criticize other countries for election fraud when our own former president is on tape ordering people to find votes that don't exist? Meadows' recordings don't just expose Trump, they expose the fragility of American democracy and the very real possibility that it could be destroyed from within. For the media, this story presents both an opportunity and a challenge. The opportunity is to use Meadows' evidence to finally break through the noise and show people exactly what Trump tried to do. The recordings make it impossible to both sides of this story or pretend it's just political theater. The challenge is that Trump supporters have been so conditioned to distrust mainstream media that even recordings of Trump's own voice might not be enough to change their minds. The question becomes, if secret recordings from Trump's own chief of staff aren't enough to prove his guilt, what would be? As we process these revelations, we need to ask ourselves some fundamental questions about our democracy. How did we get to a point where a president felt comfortable ordering horrific acts to overturn an election? What systemic failures allowed this conspiracy to get as far as it did? And most importantly, what do we do now that we have proof of what happened? Because make no mistake, Meadows' recordings aren't just evidence of past crimes. They're a warning about what could happen again if we don't take this seriously. The path forward requires courage from prosecutors, integrity from judges, and engagement from citizens. Prosecutors need to use Meadows' evidence to build an airtight case that even Trump's delay tactics can't derail. Judges need to reject any attempts to claim presidential immunity for criminal acts designed to overthrow democracy. And citizens need to understand that this isn't about partisan politics. It's about whether we're going to remain a democracy or slide into authoritarianism. This story is still developing, and there's likely more to come from Meadows' cooperation. But what we already know is damning enough. We have recordings of a president ordering crimes. We have testimony from his chief of staff that he knew what he was doing was wrong. We have evidence of a conspiracy to overthrow democracy itself. The question now isn't what happened. Meadows' recordings make that crystal clear. The question is what we're going to do about it. Because if we can't hold someone accountable for trying to steal an election when we have them on tape doing it, then we might as well admit that the rule of law no longer exists in America.